Which one are you? This is what one of my friends was taking and she was with us. He got paid, so he called the number back. He goes, who is this?
Oh, welcome to
And
this
she
testimony.
Doesn't
appear to be 1, 2, 3. What's wrong?
You know.
1, 2, 3.
And my friend got a phone.
Didn't work before.
See if the power wire is going in the back. In the back of the amplifier.
I did it one minute.
There's the amplifier.
Yeah, just what you want to do is go back to
What part are you
In
talking
the
about?
back of it, toward the bottom, near me, the power wire that goes from the
Make sure the speakers are plugged in at the back there. Push the speaker wires in the back.
There it is.
Okay.
They were working before, that's the problem. 1, 2.
Turn it up.
Oh, yes.
Turn it up a little bit.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Does this work?
better.
Testing 1, 2. Coming in. How we doing? You can hear it? All right.
Start over, please.
Ready to go?
Start
Okay.
over. Start over.
Welcome to College of Complexes. This is our 374th meeting since we started in February of 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject.
Okay, guys.
We require our speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give an hour to make a presentation, up to an hour. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter we listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets the comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. Before we introduce our speakers, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Now's the time to make them. Any announcements? No? No announcements? All right. Well, our speaker next week is Chris Bold. He's going to talk about on white contribution to racial equality. It's on your itinerary there. I'm not going to read all this. On August 12th, on market-based solution to climate change. On a market-based solution to climate change, that's Jim Drum,
Somebody from Wallow.
volunteer. What's that? Anyway, August 19th, whatever happened to Lieutenant Colombo, that's Kenneth Fackwit. And September 2nd, Gene Lance, he's president of the Alliance for Retired Americans, to talk about Labor Day, past, present, and future. That'll be interesting. Anyway, our speaker tonight is John Beasley. I got to mention something. We did have Robert Evanson. He was going to be our speaker tonight, but his wife had to go to the hospital and have an operation, so she's going to be out of commission for a few weeks. So he had me postpone it. It's postponed till the end of September. It's on page 3, which isn't here, but if you go on the internet, you'll find it. Anyway, he's rescheduled for September 28th, I think it is. So our speaker tonight, who graciously accepted on short notice to be a speaker, is John Beasley. He's sitting right here. He's going to talk about the curious nature of U.S. politics. He's English-born. He's an English-born author, retired after a long career with Xerox, educated at London's Imperial College and the University of Dallas, BSc, DIC, MBA, PhD. We'll discuss how a true socialist party has never been elected in the U.S., unlike most countries of Western Europe. He will show that there have been times when the Democrats under FDR and LBJ have saved capitalism from itself, to quote Maynard Keynes. But especially in the last 40 years, we have witnessed the current retreat from the, I think it's Trent Glorious, is that?
Le Trump Glorieux.
Le Trump Glorious, all right. To the point where despite the recent Obama aura, we have two right-wing parties. the parties have also chosen to hide behind non-democratic institutions in major policy decisions. John will argue that the failure to provide a forum for essential democratic debate has given rise to the Trump phenomena, a desperate attempt to challenge the status quo by the proletariat, doomed to failure, of course. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to John Beasley.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. And as always, my wife is eternally grateful where I can come and bore other people rather than her. You see. Anyway, so tonight the topic is the curious nature of US politics. And of course, this is somewhat from a European viewpoint. And of course, I believe it's got much more curious in the last 6 months. I think most people would agree with that, and I believe it's going to get even more curious still. And so tonight I'm going to focus on what I call 3 significant curiosities. And the first one is how culturally the US is tied to 17th century ideas. And the second is how the ballot box is thwarted by these 17th century institutions that come out of these ideas. And the fourth notion I'll talk about is how the elite have used these institutions to prevent proper democratic discourse and have promoted thereby a right-wing agenda. And the net effect, of course, of all of this has been the sabotage of America. And of course that's the title of my infamous book called Sabotaging America. So now I'm glad Hank is here because I once mentioned to Jim that I would talk about the economic sins of the Democrat Party. Well, I'll really only cover half their sins tonight, but probably the more important recent ones. So let me get started then. So if you're in England and you want to go into politics, generally you would go to Oxford University and you would study something called PPE. That's what they stands for Politics, Philosophy and Economics. And the reason for that is, of course, politics is very much bound up with philosophy and economics. So really to be a proper politician, you should have a grasp of all these 3 disciplines. And so let's talk about what are these 17th century ideas and why do they resonate today so much in America? Well, it is because these 17th century ideas were really bound into the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so, as you know, we keep referring back to them, that they are like the benchmark of American politics. People always refer back to these notions. Now, of course, in England, we didn't ever have a founding fathers, so we don't have a written constitution, so we don't constantly look back these 3 centuries to these glorious people. In fact, 100 years before the founding fathers, which is really quite a curiosity. I mean, we have a parliament that works on up-to-date things. We don't try to divine what the founding fathers meant. We don't read the Federalist Papers and so on to get that sort of hint of possibly what they meant, and so on and so forth. We just don't do that. We don't find it necessary. But it's so curious as a European to see this going on, and this horrible tangle you get into when you do that. And it actually is meant that really the whole situation is sort of cemented in aspic. You know, you can see this wonderful thing, but you can't do much about it. It's quite curious. And so so I'll do a quick review, really, of this, the leaders of this 17th century philosophy that are so close to American hearts these days. They're not unknown in England, but they're sort of not as referred to as much. So the first one I'd mention is John Locke, who lived from 1634 to 1704, so it was really at the end of the 17th century. And so I would say that John Locke really appeals to the US moderates and libertarians in his views. And so what I'd say about John Locke, he had a sort of a benign view, a sort of a positive view of human nature. He thought that there should be a parliamentary system, and the parliament, the people's government should be in control rather than a king. And because before that, in 1688, we had the Glorious Revolution when the king was booted out. In fact, because he was a Catholic in an alliance with France, and of course England by then was a Protestant country. So the king was asked to leave, and then Parliament really took control. I'll go into that in a minute. So, but John Locke believed in the Parliament system, where the people's voice is paramount, and not a dictator or a king. He also believed in sort of laissez-faire, sort of a liberalism. In America, of course, liberalism means sort of communism, so on, but in its classical sense, it means laissez-faire, let the market operate. He also, funnily enough, believed in religious toleration, and also he believed in natural rights, which he believed to be superior to any rights that were defined by law. And of course, these rights were liberty, life, liberty, and property. And so on the other hand, you had Thomas Hobbes, who lived from 1588 to 1679. Now, his philosophy appears more to the far left than the far right. So he had a more negative view of human nature. And so his view was you needed a sovereign power to keep the people in check. And so that's why we have the idea of a sovereign power. Now, a sovereign power in his parlance was a figurehead or a government that had a head of it. This is why really Thomas Hobbes rather, appeals to Americans, because you have this president that is this figurehead and is given powers that befit such a person. I mean, we have the Queen in England, but she has no powers. She is really like a titular head without power. So his view was that the sovereign, he said, really represents the nation. So he had this idea that the nation has a personality, a persona, and it really represents the people. So the power of this sovereign, this figurehead, really comes from the people. But of course, he has a duty to the people to protect them, provide protection, and also promote the common good. And if he fails in that duty, it could be a she, of course, then the people can overthrow that sovereign. And so now he also believed that, of course, the sovereign can override these natural rights. And so, of course, that really comes up. It's really coming from the ideas of the revolution, where you had the king on the one hand and the parliament on the other. And of course, we had Cromwell's dictatorship just about 40, 50 years before that. So these people lived through the revolution. They saw the king being deposed and then brought back. But so this notion of the persona of the nation was a sort of a, as I say, a dictate, if you want, but it must, by Hobbes, must follow the will of the people. Now, there's a chap called Samuel von Pufendorf, German, living at about the same time, 1632 to 1694. Now, whereas Hobbes viewed this nation as what you call fictive, really, it was just a collection of people. Pufendorf said he introduced the nation as a moral force, where the nation represents the will of the people, and it should be a moral will. So that was different. Of course, also at the time of revolution, you had Rousseau's ideas along similar grounds, and he appealed to the revolutionaries also. And so then later you had Jeremy Bentham. Later, he was in the 18th century, 1748 to 1832, and he introduced the notion of utilitarianism, which really applied to human nature. Now, what he said was that people, humans, really wanted to secure pleasure and avoid pain, and they would go to great lengths to do that, and this would result in the maximum happiness. And of course, that's reflected in the Declaration of Independence. So that's where those ideas. Now, this notion of the maximum utility really neatly coincides with Adam Smith's ideas of sort of maximizing profit and so on, all this idea of classical economics. So that's where this philosophy and economics comes together in the classical world. And so again, what I'm saying about the US Constitution itself, the Founding Fathers looked back 100 years into these philosophies. So they created this rather peculiar, to us, system of this, the Constitution, which defines the structure of government. And that structure was the exact structure that was in England in 1688. And that was after the Glorious Revolution, when they kicked the king out. And after that revolution, the English people invited William of Orange, who came from Holland, and his wife Mary, who happened to be the deposed king's daughter, to come over to England and be co-regents. But the catch was that he had to sign the Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights, of 1688. That's to say, he could appoint a cabinet and have ministers, but they must have the approval of the Parliament. So he was a constitutional monarch. Now, that's exactly the same as we have in America with the president. He can have his cabinet, and again, it must be approved by the Senate. Now, of course, we've moved on in England since that, 3 centuries from that system. We have a cabinet, but the cabinet is run by the Prime Minister, and it's within the Parliament. And she can select her cabinet ministers, but they must be members of Parliament. So she herself must have been elected, and the cabinet ministers must have been elected. So you don't get characters walking off the street, as you do here, and becoming ministers and members of the cabinet. You know, they must be known parliamentary entities. So, now, but that's the system that America adopted, and that was part of the original articles of the Constitution. And so that was that cabinet arrangement is the executive system. Of course, then Article 1, in fact, defined Congress, which roughly corresponds to the lower and upper house in England. I won't go into that, but you can ask me, and that's a legislative house. And of course, you added a new thing, which we didn't have until Tony Blair came along, the arch charlatan of England, and produced a Supreme Court. Now, the reason for the Supreme Court was that the Constitution wrote these natural laws in and other laws, and of course then you had to have them divined, because that clouded or signaled how to operate your legal system, and actually give guidance in political matters, from then on. And so the problem therein is that you have this body, the Supreme Court, which actually dodges the question of what I would call legislative control, and actually decides very, very important social questions. And that's just not the way it works in other countries. the parliament, legal, social questions really decided by the whole people. And of course, the Supreme Court is nowhere near democratic. These people are appointed. And as in England now, they come from the sort of right wing of the body of people. And so this sort of locks in a very, very, I call it a right-wing agenda normally. And so, of course, the Constitution added 10 amendments almost immediately were added, and of course these were sort of Bill of Rights, largely defined to the rights of the individual. And of course, over the next century or so, 17 more were added, really adding more rights and so on, especially, for example, the votes for women. So a lot of the pious notions that you read in the Declaration of Independence about the freedom of everybody didn't apply to women, it didn't apply to minorities or so on. And so it was a curious document from the word go. Now, the other thing that is curious is the notion of plebiscites. Now, which are where you appeal to the whole government or the whole sort of nation, people, on a one man, one woman, or one person, one vote basis on a constitutional question. We've just had one in England about leaving the EU, and we voted to leave, Brexit. Now that's quite unusual at the federal level, and over here it just doesn't happen, but it has happened in the states, like. Now at the time, interestingly enough, at the time of the US Civil War, only 2 of the 11 Confederate states permitted a referendum or a plebiscite on the question of leaving, because the 9 of them didn't trust the will of the people. They figured they probably wouldn't vote to leave the Union. Now the only 2 states that did vote were Virginia, and that resulted in Virginia splitting into 2, West Virginia and Virginia. And the other state that voted, of course, was Texas, that actually voted to be independent. Now, Texas actually never voted to join the Confederacy. And I think it has to vote every year to stay in the Union. And so you see, strange things can happen. Now, as I said, the problems with the Supreme Court, as I've said, you have these major issues, which are really political issues, social issues, and so then you avoid a lot of democratic discussion, and so both parties hand it over to the Supreme Court, this institution, which was invented to sort of look over this construct called the Constitution, which looks peculiar to people in England because we don't have it written. You don't have to do that. You have to figure out what current events are occurring and what's the right thing to do in current circumstances. Because the current circumstances, say in America, but probably at the time of the Revolution, there was just a few million people, and now you've got 300 million. So, you went right through the Industrial Revolution and so on and so forth. And so in those days, of course, you wanted a well-regulated militia, and so you wanted people to have guns. Well, now you don't. You've got an army. You don't really do. But then never mind. So you get peculiar things going on with that. And so, of course, as you've seen, that one appointment can change the whole complexion of politics for a generation. Just one appointment. And so we saw with Gorsuch being appointed, that's what's happened. You have this 5-4 bias now to the right for a generation. So it really doesn't matter really what happens otherwise. Things will be sent up to the Supreme Court without a great deal of influence by the ballot box, really, where it should be, on these matters, because in fact, generally speaking, what's happened, it's been amazing in America in the last few years, how liberal, on homosexuality and so on, the public has become. And so quite a change has happened, but the Supreme Court really lags behind that because of its composition and where it works. Now, of course, the way it works, of course, is that the president nominates somebody, and they have to be, there's 2 steps in the Senate to confirm these people. And sometimes they're not, like Bork, for example. Robert Bork was denied appointment by the Senate. And of course, the other year, Merrick Garland, who was eminently qualified, was denied even a hearing. So you see, it's really, I would say, become very politicized. And as I've said before, it really makes a mockery of the idea of this fixed and sort of pristine constitution that you appeal to. Because it really does look like you have two constitutions, one for the Democrats and one for the Republicans. So how could you have a sort of solid body of law based on that? I mean, it just seems very, as I say, very curious. But there you are, you're stuck with it. And of course, as I said, back to the charlatan Tony Blair, in England, Parliament was supreme. But for his own reasons, and because he and other dastardly things he did, which you can ask me about, we now have a Supreme Court. Same thing with these senile elderly judges, basically right-wing people. And so we're actually, Parliament should remain supreme, really. It's the will of the whole vote of the people, as Locke and Tom Paine would have had it. And so, as I say, what basically you have these major issues being decided by the judiciary and not the legislature. And that's very, very curious. Very curious. And so, as I said, this means a proper democratic debate by the ballot box just doesn't take place. Now, as I've said before, in England, we had and we still have a Tory government, right-wing government. Now, they follow the von Hayek economic doctrine. I'll go to that later on, but it does mean taking money from the poor and cutting benefits and rewarding the rich, basically. And that's what's gone on. They've actually reduced benefits and cut payments to disabled people and so on and so forth. And so they passed that law, and it got to the House of Lords, which is the overseeing body, the wise men, if you like, and the Lords threw it out and actually had it debated and shamed the Parliament, the lower house, into changing it. So, that was a very signal event. So now, so what have we seen over the years? What has the Supreme Court done? Well, I would say up until the the 60s, into the 70s, you mostly had on important issues like highly majority decisions. But since that time, the court has been heavily politicized, and you get all these 5-4 decisions, and I'll just go through some of the major ones over the years. For example, in 1803, let's go back a bit, by a 4-0 decision by Marbury and Madison case, that established the fact that the Supreme Court power has a judicial review over Congress. So here you have the legislative body having power over basically the ballot box, which I find very curious. And then in 1819, by a 7-0 decision, McCulloch versus Maryland, that established the federal government's implied powers over the states. And of course, we've seen a lot of arguments about states' rights ever since. Then, of course, you had the famous Dred Scott versus Sanford decision, 1857, and that was a 7-2 decision, which denied citizenship to African American slaves. And then in 1896, 71 decision, you had the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which upheld separate but equal segregation in the states. And in 1944, the Korematsu versus United States 6-3 decision that upheld the internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War. And the Brown versus Board of Education, a very famous case, This was a 9-0 decision, upheld the separation of white students, separation of black and white students in public schools was unconstitutional. So that really was the beginning of the era of civil rights and so on. In 63, another 9-0 decision, Gideon versus Wainwright, criminal defendants would have the right to an attorney even if they couldn't afford one. So in New York Times versus Sullivan, 1964, again a 9-0 decision, you had a lawsuit based on libel or defamation must show intent or recklessness. And of course, 1966, the Miranda decision, a very important one, 5-4 decision, and that was where prisoners must be advised of their rights before being questioned by police. 1967, Loving versus Virginia, which invalidated the laws prohibiting interracial marriage. That was only in 1967. Roe versus Wade, that's a 7-2 decision, and you know what that was. Then you had United States versus Nixon. That was an 8-0 decision, which said that the president cannot use executive privilege to withhold evidence in a criminal case. So even the president was deemed to be not above the law. Then you have the Regents of California versus Vacchi. Again, that's a 5-4 decision. So all these are going to be 5-4 decisions, which upheld the use of race as one of the many factors in college admissions. Bush versus Gore, again, 5-4 decision, which said that there should be no recount of the 2000 presidential election because there wasn't enough reasonable time. And look what happened. And then in 2008, District of Columbia versus Heller, citizens have the right to possess firearms at home for their self-defense. 5-4. Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, 5-4, again in 2010, that's 7 years ago now, which meant that corporations and unions can spend virtually unlimited amounts of money in the election process. Very bad decision. Now you have the National Federation of Independent Business versus Sibelius, 5-4 decision, 2012, upheld the mandate for that most Americans should have health insurance. And the last one, I'll go into 2013, a 5-4, Shelby County versus Holder. States and localities do not need federal approval to change the voting. So this is why you have all these various electronic votings and magic machinery and whatnot. Okay, so as we say, I find it very curious that you hand over these important decisions to a Supreme Court, and you do have it's coming down to 5-4, and I find it very curious indeed. It's just anyway. So now I'll go on to how the elites have defeated democracy in this country. So many people, many commentators have announced the death of the state. Basically, the state being the people. As Abraham Lincoln said, that we should have the government of the people, by the people, for the people. And of course now what's happened, we have the government by the rich and powerful, most of the corporations for their benefit. So I say to and basically I've said before and I'll say it again, they've sabotaged this country. And so what we've seen domestically is the power of corporate money has basically brought Congress of both parties. Because the way this system runs. See, in England, the election process lasts about 4 or 5 weeks. You just can't spend this ton of money. I think the last election cost $3 billion. We just can't spend $3 billion. And so, but that alone, but the whole process of Parliament, by-elections, and the fact that you can have votes of no confidence and the Prime Minister can disappear really does. There's immediate effect. The people sort of feel a move and you feel it and they respond. Here, you're stuck in this aspect, especially when you hand your decisions up to the Supreme Court. Personally, I'd abolish the Supreme Court and change the whole constitution. There you go. So actually what we've seen is oligopoly control of most segments of the economy. Basically, you have near monopolies wherever you look. Antitrust laws notwithstanding, they're just not implemented. And so you have oligopoly control of the media. We have about 4 or 5 entities controlling of such puerile nonsense that passes a serious discussion and entertainment. So candidly, we never look at TV. We can do without it. And so I've gone on to AT&T services, and I told them I didn't need their Uverse TV. I wanted their fast broadband, but that was it. So anyway, so then you come to the multinational situation, and basically there you have just pure cartels, which sort of divide up. So you have, in the mining business, you've got 2 major companies that really control, all the mining interests around the world. Just like in America, you've got 2 brothers running the sugar cartel, and pay both. I think one brother pays the Democrats and the other pays the Republicans. That's a wonderful scheme. Now, the WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, were written to enable cartels, especially the financial institutions, to set up shop in any location and provide any product. And moreover, based in WTO rules, as currently in existence, have been for some years now, they can sue governments right down to the local jurisdictions concerning any law or ordinance that curtails their profits, and they can do that. So if you don't like something, your local government passes it, some corporation comes along and we're going to sue you in court, and that's happened. I think Enron did that, in fact, in South America. And so globalizations, and of course the multinational corporations, funds have vanished overseas, and so you have about, estimated to be 20 to 30 trillion held in offshore tax havens, and so they don't bring back money to America or to the West even, which accounts for its slow impoverishment. And so, as I say, globalization has been used to impoverish, demoralize, and silence the US middle classes. And so real median income has declined over the 40 years, whereas the income of the 1% has gone from 17% take of the GDP to well over 20%. And of course, Trump aims to increase this even more. So what's the role of the Democratic Party in all of this? And here we get to some fun, because it's really not been a late left wing at all, Hank. So I brought this on for your benefit. I'm glad you came, Hank. All right, so let's start. This actually, this is only half the talk, because I could start with FDR, but I chose not to. So I start with Jimmy Carter. Now, Jimmy Carter was the great deregulator. His chief was Herman Kahn. So what did he deregulate? Because before that, many industries were highly regulated. For example, the airlines deregulated, trucking, railroads, communications, finance and banking, and energy companies. Now what's happened is, almost without exception, you know, when it was first revealed, there was a burst of companies coming in, and then later on you had takeovers, and so now basically they're all oligopolies. That's to say 4 or 5 companies that are basically near monopolies and control the market. And so now we come to Bill Clinton, the great globalist. So let's go and see what he did. Well, he felt our pain. He gave us some pain. He, of course, signed the law on NAFTA. NAFTA had been started under Bush Senior, but he shepherded China into the WTO. And of course that really accelerated the trade deficit. And so the cumulative trade deficit, which had started in the late 70s actually, until this day is about 18 to 20 trillion. And so what's not recognized, which I keep emphasizing, when you have a trade deficit, that has to be paid for by selling assets. By selling assets, either bonds, government bonds, corporate bonds, or whole businesses, or in the state of Texas, sell your land, which is happening. In fact, Texas is the state that sold more land than any other state to foreign ownership. Now, if you like that, that's great. But what's happened is this flood to the dollars have to get recycled back. And so these dollars have been used to fund the huge bubbles we've had, the dot-com bubble that crashed in 2000, and of course the housing bubble that crashed in 2008. It's all due to this money coming back from the trade deficit. And of course the Federal Reserve, which is another entity without democratic control, it's as Albert has said many times, it's a private bank run for the interest of banks, and the hell have they messed of it? They made a huge mess of it. And of course, Alan Greenspan, I'll get to him later, expressed that there was irrational exuberance going on, but did nothing about it. And so it really allowed these bubbles, these 2 bubbles, to happen for sort of cultural reasons. I'll talk about Alan Greenspan in a minute. And so this went on under Clinton. Now, the great, as I say, Clinton's great coup was financial deregulation. That really was his great coup. So what happened? What were the major events there? Well, the one was, of course, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. So that meant that banks, before that, banks were separated into commercial high street banks, and then on the other hand, they were separated from investment banks. So now they became all one. They could do anything they wanted, and they did. They just went wild. And then there was the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, December 2000, and that basically took away any control over derivatives. And when talking about derivatives, we'll bring up the personage of a lady called Brooksley Bourne. Very interesting what happened to Brooksley. Well, Brooksley was one female up against 5 ignorant economic simpletons who were arrogant and vindictive. And of course, she lost too. Now, as I go through, you'll find out who these individuals are. Now, so who was Brooksley? Well, Brooksley was one of the first female graduates in the law school in Stanford. And they complained about her being there because at the time, Vietnam War, she was taking the place of a male who could get out of the war by going to law school. But she graduated top of the class. And she was in fact editor of the Stanford Law Review. So she was fairly bright. She later went to Washington as a taxation and derivatives specialist, and she was there for 20 years. Now she met, being there in Washington, she came to the attention of Hillary, and she went down to meet Bill, and was considered at one point to become Attorney General, but they didn't get on, so she lost out to another lady. But as a sop, in 1966, she was given the control of to become head of CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission.
What was your year on that?
1966. Now that basically started to control commodity prices of agriculture and so on, but also would control things like the derivatives. And so as early on, she met with Alan Greenspan, one of the 5 gentlemen she got to deal with, and Alan said to her that he didn't believe in regulation against fraud. He believed that the market would always deal with such things, because he was an advocate and an admirer of Ayn Rand, who of course didn't believe in any regulation by government whatsoever. So he told her in no uncertain terms that he didn't expect her agency to do anything like that to combat fraud. Now, it turns out that the agency was an independent agency reporting to the, as part of the cabinet, reporting directly to the president. Now, of course, the agency would come under the purview of the Congress and the Senate, which I'll get into in a minute. And so so as time went on, of course, she began to be aware of this growth of derivatives, because before the banks were let loose by deregulation, because deregulation started under Jimmy Carter, continued under Reagan. And so this derivatives business became quite pronounced. So she was very concerned about it, because derivatives are basically really a bet, and sometimes the bet is a so-called credit default swap, so that you can take a bet that if your venture loses money, then you basically take an insurance against that. But you see, these bets are private between 2 parties and are secret. And so a lot of this was going on and growing. Now, of course, what happened in that first year, that there was massive fraud by Procter & Gamble, Bankers Trust, against Procter & Gamble involving derivatives. And of course, basically, because they were offered this thing to help them, and in fact, people at Bankers Trust knew that it was fraud. And so this came to light, and there was a court case, and so the whole business of derivatives, came to light about how it worked and who was in it. And so Brooksley feared that this fraud would pose a market risk. And so she notified the Clinton's Economic Council that she had these fears and she should regulate. But she was up against 5 gentlemen, namely Alan Greenspan, who was on this, Robert Rubin, Larry Summers, Arthur Levitt, and Timothy Geithner. Very famous names in finance and economics. Complete morons, actually, in my judgment. Complete morons. So they were adamant against her. And they basically said, lady, you don't know what you're doing. Once you regulate, you'll cause a crisis, and you'll destroy this wonderful prosperity that we're having. Stock market's booming, we're doing very well. I mean, who are you to do anything? Anyway, she went ahead and published her position paper on this, and it drove them wild. They really couldn't do anything to her directly, but they went to the Congress, the Senate, and said this lady should be stopped. And so the Senate held 4 hearings, and she appeared, and these other gentlemen appeared, and of course said that she didn't know what she was doing, she was dangerous, and she should be stopped. Well, just about that time, there was a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management. Interesting, this company. It was run by Merton and another character from Harvard who claimed to be using computerized mathematics to predict the market. And in fact, they could take the risk out of the market because of this mathematics, you see. And of course, many of the people were dying to jump onto this scheme. Because, I mean, your luck can go your way now and again when you try to predict the future. But unfortunately, they bet on Russian bonds, Russian bonds, and took a big position, and it basically broke the bank, broke it entirely, broke it. And so, of course, this really shook the whole financial world at the time. And so what happened there was the Secretary of Treasury Rubin and Plumbers and whatnot lent on 13 banks, Wall Street banks, to pony up $3.5 billion to bail out the fund. So it was bailed out. And so now the Senate decided there must be something in this derivatives business, because they were using the derivatives to place their bets and so on. So again, they had an investigation, and Greenspan came along and said, well, no, this is just a one-off, it's just, it's so on and so forth. And so, and I'm persuaded that no, that this Beasley woman must be got rid of, and because she's dangerous and, and what she's doing. So anyway, so what they did, they decided to take away all control over derivatives and such forth from the CFTC, at which point Beasley resigned. And so 8 years later, you had a tremendous crash due to derivatives. Now, there was some later, now actually, before I get to that, there was another important character in this scenario of incompetence. Dr. Phil Graham and his wife, Dr. Wendy Lee Graham. Of course, he was senator from Texas. Graham was deeply embedded in the oil industry. His wife, they were both doctors of economics, but with a decidedly Hayek view of how you run things. And of course, Wendy Graham had been actually head of the CFTC, appointed by Reagan earlier. But she had gone to work for Enron. And she was against any regulation of the oil and energy contracts. And so, in fact, Enron fleeced the Californians for quite a while. But she was on the audit committee, working with Arthur Anderson in the compliance department. Well, I don't really think I have to say much more, because Enron went out of business, and so did Arthur Anderson. I mean, a total fraudulent enterprise on both counts by these two PhD economists, practitioners of the dismal science. So I mean, really, there's something to be said for honest dealing in this world. And when you go mad and try to cheat the whole public, in the end it ends in tears, and this is what we see over and over. And of course, as I say, this 2000 crash was caused by this total failure of this opaque derivatives market. Now, it's been said that this whole market, which was opaque, amounted to roughly 600 trillion. Now, there was no one in the world that could cover this. And of course, the whole worldwide, crashed the whole economy, not only of America, but Europe and around the globe. And that's what Beasley feared, and that's what these complete, I'd say, incompetence and vicious too, derided a lady, and she was right. And of course, so what's happened to these people? Well, Alan Greenspan made a confession. He was up before Congress, and he allowed us the fact that his lifelong views were wrong, actually. He made some fundamental kind of errors. Sure he did. But when he was up there in the Federal Reserve, his every word was listened to. He couldn't understand what he said, but whatever he said was wonderful. So on. Geithner, of course, during this crashes, he was head of the Federal Reserve in New York, overseeing the banking situation of the New York banks, probably the most important overseeing job. He didn't know what was happening, apparently. He couldn't see the bubbles. I mean, I could see the bubbles when I was here, but the dot-com bubble was more than obvious. This thing would crash. And I'm saying with the housing, I mean, housing could not go up every year at 20%. I mean, it was mathematically impossible, but anyway, I suppose what you don't want to see, you don't see. So Geithner became Secretary of the Treasury, and then now he's off back to Wall Street. So this circle of what I call the cozy money club, from Wall Street to the Fed to the Treasury, government around us, where they all look after each other, it's like a criminal circle in operation, so to speak. So let's see, we've covered Larry Summers. Now, Larry Summers was kind of the tack dog of the group. And so, where was he? What did he do after this attack? He's never apologized or admitted he was wrong very much. And of course, he joined Obama as one of his economic advisors, which gave me the first clue about where Obama was going to go about regulating things and sorting out Wall Street. Robert Rubin, of course, went back to join Citibank, and of course Citibank was one of the big banks that had to be bailed out, as was Goldman Sachs. If that had been allowed to go through because Goldman Sachs was up to its eyeballs in derivatives, they would have been broke. They would have been broke. They should have been broke. And so Arthur Levitt was head of the SEC. He sort of apologized somewhat, said he didn't really mean it, that Beasley was a nice, competent person, but he was persuaded by these other clowns. Which says a lot about the competence at the highest levels of American finance and economics. It says a lot about it. It says a lot about the Democratic Party, too. So what's happening today? Well, we have the Dodd-Frank rules put in place to prevent such dastardly things happening again. But no one was really punished over this. Outright fraud, really, on a grand scale. I mean, saying that this guy in Alabama in his threadbare shirt, living in his shack, should get a $300,000 mortgage, because he breathed. That was utter lunacy on a grand scale. But what's happened since these banks were rescued? Tons of money, federal money, was poured in. Quantitative easing, as I've said, they took the money, but virtually for no interest, loaned it back to the Fed at interest, and they're making 50, 60 million and of course not properly investing, as investment banks should, back into the productive part of the economy. It's really a case of the tail wagging the dog. And until we destroy this tail and make it work properly for the American public, this disaster will keep repeating. So apart from reforming the whole constitution, the financial system, the educational system, everything else, nothing's wrong, right? In my judgment, humble judgment. So now, of course, these people in Wall Street still believe in the markets. Well, why wouldn't you when you can grossly manipulate them? I mean, and swindle the entire nation while you're doing it, and walk away with fees that are eye-watering, eye-watering. And the same in London. I mean, these people. I mean, the people that are worthless are earning the most, and the people that are worth the most, like teachers, are paid peanuts. If this country had any sense, it would pay teachers their way in college and master's degrees. Because those are the people that are worthwhile, and not this gang of criminals on Wall Street. And so we got our president, who's going to make America great again. So the fundamental question is, when will this sabotaging of America stop? And when will the state persona really look after the well-being of the nation? Now, what's actually, just to finish off as I circle back to economics, what really has been going on, as I said in my missive to Tom here, that we did live in the through the le temps glorieux, the glorious 30 years, and that was, of course, the period from 1945 to 75. So when I came in '68 here, we were at the tail end of that, and the living was good, and so on. So I remember that. But things have gone quite wrong since, because in the period of the Trente Glorieuses, we were operating under the Keynesian principle of making sure that you had adequate demand in the economy. That's the whole principle of Keynesian economics. And so the government makes sure that the lower ebb of the proletariat have enough money to support demand. Because demand by the proletariat is 70% of the entire economy. And if you take away money and jobs from the proletariat, obviously the demand drops and the economy drops. Now, what we've been operating under the last 30 years or more is a philosophy of von Hayek, totally opposite philosophy, which goes like this: that you actually have to take away benefits from the poorest proletariat to encourage them to work. Otherwise, they're so lazy and they wouldn't work very much. And you have to reward the rich, because they're the ones that have the wealth to invest in the economy, see. So that's called trickle-down or supply-side economics, which is so Keynesian is about demand economics, the other thing is about supply economics. Now, it's done quite well, hasn't it, over the last 30 years or so. So during that 30-odd years, American business has been shipped overseas. You have huge joblessness. You have people that lost their homes, committed suicide, and all the rest of it. And in England, we've done the same thing. To pay for all of this trade deficit, Britain has been selling off its assets, its infrastructure, and its businesses. And so basically the centre of London's been, if you want to buy a huge apartment next to Hyde Park, it will cost you between 50 and 100 million pounds. That's well over almost at 1.3 to the dollar. You're going to spend about 80 to over $100 million. And of course, that's been going on. And Hong Kong has realtors that make their living by doing that. So anyway, so we have, anyway, I won't go on much more, So that's my question, basically. The last one is, there is a state persona. It should, according to Hobbes, represent the people. But because we have two right-wing parties, we have no party that really represents the people and the interests of the people. So I'm waiting patiently for the people to wake up. I think Trump is a pure example of Ayn Rand and von Hayek philosophy, supply side stuff, which we've seen, and it just doesn't work. You can see it doesn't work. Tell me it works.
For the rich.
But it works for them. Yeah, it works for Wall Street and the rich. But you see, it won't work in the long run, even for them.
Right.
Because if you sell off your whole country, you won't be controlling it or owning it. Right? And that's the end point of when you do this. That's the end point. So you've lost sovereignty. So, and I've reiterated many times, I mean, Keynes talked about trade, but he talked about balanced trade and the mechanisms to how you make that happen. And so, of course, the gold standard, as it used to be back in the 19th century, did that because you had to pay gold to pay your international debts. Of course, when you ran out of gold, that was it. But when you can print dollars, you can go on doing this. But there's a day of reckoning comes. It's a day of reckoning. Just like when you rack up your credit card, it's a day of reckoning when you hit the limit. And the US and other countries have gone way over the limit. So to really, you can't have these imbalances going on this long or forever. There's the day of reckoning, and no party I've ever heard get up and talk about such things. Now, of course, Trump alludes to such things, but has no concrete policy really to do what I would do, which is to correct all of this. Speaks a good game, but a failed businessman over and over, borrowing money from the Russians to survive, ain't the solution. Never was. I mean, he knows nothing about economics, probably nothing about finance. He's frankly a thoroughly disgusting person, really. One I wouldn't want to meet, because I might tell him what I think, and he wouldn't like it. I don't think he could take it. He's a man without any intellect whatsoever. He's a rich kid. I've seen many in my life. And mostly these rich kids grow up to be worthless and useless. And you see a lot of them in Plano, for example. So there you are, folks. I'll entertain your questions. So
John, somewhere towards the end of your presentation, you mentioned the tail wagging the dog.
yes.
Remember that? Could you explain, at least for me, and the other people not interested, don't do it, but what is the tail, and what exactly is the dog?
Well, the tail is the financial system, and the dog is the nation. And so to have growing prosperity in the nation, you must have proper investment. And so this is why the Glass-Steagall Act was put in place in 1933. So you would have an investment banking system and you'd have a commercial banking system. Now so to grow an economy, in general, you must allow the private sector to borrow from banks and invest in machinery and technology and so on and so forth. And basically speaking, the government sells bonds to invest in, generally speaking, in infrastructure. Although the private sector, for example, can invest in infrastructure as well, but it's much cheaper if the government does it by far, because it's not constrained by maximizing profit, and of course it can borrow at much lower interest rates.
Can I ask you one other question?
Sure.
Where is this myth of Mrs. Brooks?
She's alive. She's
What is she doing?
I'm not sure, but she's probably gone back to the academic world, you know. But she certainly was a very bright person who actually, like Warren Buffett, agreed with her that this was he said this is a weapon of mass destruction, mass financial destruction, the derivatives. And, you know, so, but I think she's back. I haven't really tracked her to know, but she, you know, I was aware of this going on. I was aware of the growing problem. It's not been solved. It's still, the derivatives are still huge business. And so we have another crisis really around the corner. You cannot, because we do not have a functioning proper financial system. I mean, the financial system basically in Wall Street is just a giant gambling den. That's what it is. You know, and because when you buy a stock, for example, okay, where does that money go? Well, it goes from one pocket. It doesn't go, no money goes to a company. And of course, that's who. Not one penny goes to the company, it just goes from one pocket to another. You know, one rich man's person, you know, or pension funds. So, you know, you must have capital, but, you know, you must have it. It must be controlled in such a way that it promotes business, and especially small businesses. So, you know, it's from small businesses that large businesses grow. Now, when you have a system that impedes small business and small business creation and impedes innovation, okay, look what's happened in America. I mean, most of the innovative things you see coming in are coming in from other countries, because basically the way, well, I've gone over this before. I think you missed the lecture I gave about that. But the heads of corporations are not interested in taking risk because they're there for a short time. They're loading down with stock options. So they're interested in the pumping up the earnings. Now, you can do that by cutting wages, by cutting benefits, by cutting research and developments. That will increase earnings, and for a while, you know, you'll do well, your stock will go up, and you'll cash out 2-3 years, you know, several tens of millions of dollars to the better. But in doing so, you have basically wiped out the future of the company. And as I've said many times, the only people who have an interest in the long-term future of a company are the employees who have no say. Now in Germany, as I've said before, you have the heads of unions on the board of directors. Now in my favorite company, which is Mondragon in the Basque country of Spain, the working people vote in the board of directors. The board of directors, actually, the board of directors come from the working people because it's employee owned. And they decide who are the officers, and if the officers mess up, they're fired. The people actually, so that's democratic, if you want, capitalism at work. And when you have the dog wagging the tail, that's to say you have a financial system that works and funds businesses, where you can go to and start a business, where you have a much more comprehensive, so instead of having an employment agency, you have a business creation agency, which is an expansion of the Small Business Administration, which works as a kind of a, as I say, you need an agency. So every kid has a job can look forward to a job. And so, you know, this is what you're going to have, if you're going to maintain a standard of living and compete in the world. Now, of course, what you could do, America could do, is say, well, we won't trade with anybody because we can feed ourselves and we have enough energy and we have a totally closed economy if you want. But then you can't go running around the world being the world's policeman either, because you won't have any overseas earnings to pay for it. Okay, John, your question.
John, we have been on this merry-go-round several times on John Maynard Keynes,
Yes.
I am still encountering a logical disconnect where you're speaking about demand coming from the people,
Yes.
and yet the only thing I've ever heard offered is government spending as the means, and I'm trying to understand, is not Keynesian economics the basically the identical thing as deficit spending? Is that not, and how is that not contributing to the deficit?
Well, yes. When you get married, okay, because I got married, what you do, you engage in huge deficit spending by taking on a mortgage. That's to say, you borrow the money, and over the period, by working, you pay it back. So you engage in huge deficit spending, and also you take out a credit card. Again, you go to the store and you're in deficit. Okay, so that's deficit spending for, if you want, transactional positive purposes. Now, what Keynes said was this. He said that the classical philosophy, which Adam Smith proposed and Marshall and so on and so forth, Bigou, they said that when there's a downturn, a crash, and of course the biggest crashes, as we think, are caused by the finance world just going mad, which they do every once in a while. Greed and stupidity seems to go hand in hand. Then of course, what happens with a downturn, you get layoffs, because small companies can't keep, say they have a workforce of 10 people, and the economy slows. They say, well, I can't afford to keep 10 people, I have to fire one person. So they fire the one person. So that person is not spending as much, so the demand drops. And so, since the demand drops, this cascades across the whole economy. And so what can happen is, what you saw happening in the 30s was the demand dropped and stuck at this low level. It did not, as was thought, automatically recover. And so what Keynes said is, look, when this has happened, the only entity that can step forth and spend, deficit spend, is the government. And it must spend money by borrowing. Now, when you have your own currency, then it can just print it and spend it. Now, that will get the economy moving again.
Doesn't that just water down the blood supply?
No, it doesn't. It puts people back to work, and so what happens is that everyone is now working, they're being taxed, just as, as I said, when you're married and you get the mortgage, you earn and you pay this back. And so really, you can have a deficit, okay, but of course, once you have a recovery, then the government must stop spending, which is why I have said that with the two levers of the economy, one being fiscal spending and the other being monetary policy, these must be run together, okay? Because to have a balance, these must be run together. So right now, you've got a Republican Congress that won't spend money. So if there were a downturn and you don't spend money, you're going to be stuck in this recessionary cycle. You just have to have, so what Keynes said is you must spend money, deficit spending, for a while, and once the economy gets going again, you get increased taxes, and so the government then can reverse, in fact, get a surplus. Now,
but it doesn't, because we have a Congress that's just like pouring fuel on the fire. They just go into more and more deficit spending.
Okay, what I did not bring out, and what was the case, at the end of the few years of Clinton administration, there was a surplus.
Right.
And so the deficit was spent down. Now, it was that moron, George Bush Jr., driven by another moron called Karl Rove, who said, goody, goody, we can now reduce the taxes because we've got this surplus. And so I was, you see, look, there's reason in all things, and so when you're in a deep recession, the only way out is to spend money. In fact, have deficits. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I was in deficit for years, actually, when I first came. I borrowed about $60,000 for my house, I think, and now I'm in, surplus. Thank goodness. That's what happens. So, it's if you have wisdom enough, and you have people with intellect enough to do that, and I'm afraid we don't. You had people like Larry Summers, Alan Greenspan, Geithner, and so on, without intellect. Either they were without intellect, or they looked the other way, putting money in their back pockets, knowing what was going to happen. And by the way, you can see what's going to happen by following the discount rate of the Federal Reserve. Now, that's the standard rate that main banks charge each other. Now, it turns out that the discount rate began to drop from about 2001, after the crash, dot-com crash. Interest rates were dropped, to recover. Because, of course, if it's a mild recession, you can use monetary policy. You don't have to use fiscal policy and deficits. That will usually bring the economy back. So what happened was they dropped the interest rates. Then all the way through from about 2001 or 2002, the Federal Reserve gradually increased the interest rates. It went up to about 7 or 8%. Now, just in about 2007, it began to drop. And Alan Greenspan retired. And I think he knew what was going to happen. Yeah. And I think they all knew. But the gravy train was so lovely for all of them, especially the gang in Wall Street that paid the politicians to do what they want. That was it. But look at the disaster it caused, okay? You must have regulation. You must, so because this, as I say, you have greed and stupidity, really, and that runs hand in hand with these people. But I I can't believe they're that stupid. I think they know they know that people aren't educated. They're not paying any attention, and so that's what they do, and that's what they did. Prove me wrong. But what's happened with this trade deficit, especially as I've said before, the congressmen stand on the steps of the Capitol and so on, and with their badges, I'm patriotic American, and they've sold the country out.
Yes.
They've sold the country out. And I would say just get rid of a whole lot of them. I mean, if I had a banker that ruined my bank account, I certainly wouldn't keep him, I'd say there's something wrong with this picture. I think you should take a hike. Okay, next one.
Okay, so
The tail wagging the dog.
can I go to two? Okay. There were 3 books that I read: Too Big to Fail, The Big Short, and The Smartest Guys in the Room, about Enron.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be informed, because I didn't have an economics or any of those classes in my nursing school. They just didn't
Right. No,
offer
I
it.
understand.
But do you think these 3 things would make a difference even if we got corporate tax down, where they would come back,
Yes.
and then also ethics? No one involved in Congress or the Senate can buy any stocks during their tenure, nor their families, for 5 years at least. And then also another thing, and another.
Yeah. Carry on.
And then my third thing is the taxes, when the tax code is bigger than Obamacare even for that. And then also ethics, and then also, like you said, investment banking gets separated.
Right.
And Dodd-Frank gets revised where it's functional and there's ethics.
Yep. I think, well, these, if you want to tinker around the edges of the system, yeah, but I think fundamentally those solutions, if you like, are just not radical enough. Because I think, frankly, the sheer greed of Wall Street, is beyond belief. These people are without moral. As long as they're making money, they'd sell their granny for sixpence. They have no moral values at all. In fact, and you talk about moral values in business. Candidly, there is no integrity in. Now, look, in this world, the most prized possession anybody can have is integrity, especially in business. Now, if you don't have integrity, you won't have a business in the long run. And when you have a whole gang of corrupt politicians, what you have, you won't have a country. You won't have a country. Now, so thinking and hoping that people are going to have moral values, I'm sorry. Now, there are a few people. The real problem is very simple. There are people on the left and the right that have moral values, okay? That really do believe in promoting their patriots. They want the country to succeed. They want their neighbor to do better than us, and so on and so forth. But they go to Congress, and immediately they have to raise money to be elected. And it isn't little money. As Tom will tell you, it's thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. That money has to come from somewhere. And where it comes from, basically two places. It comes from Wall Street or the corporations, who now, as you know, because of this Citizens United unlimited funds. So you see, it's the people with, what these, it's the rich element, the wealthy element, who don't understand the basic principles of Keynesian economics, which are, they believe, you see, okay, we'll get more competitive by lowering wages. Well, you lower wages, what you do is you decrease demand. So if you decrease demand and it's 70% of the economy will shrink. That should be fairly obvious. Now, what happened was, up until the Trente Glorieuses, right, 30 years, the average median wage in America of a family kept pace with the rise in GDP. And after 75, it did. And the 1%, using the philosophy of von Hayek, decided, oh no, we don't like that. The trade unions are the problem. They're causing all this trouble, and so what we're going to do is we're going to ship our businesses overseas, and so on and so forth. And they did. And of course, you remember Ross Perot talked about the big sucking sound, and that was about NAFTA. Well, WTO was like 10 times worse. All right, so you gutted your economy, and I can't. But I pinch myself and say, well, because I talked about this back in the 80s. Well, once I heard Reagan speak, I predicted. I heard him and I said, okay, I understand what you're doing. And he was just a mouthpiece. I don't think he understood what he was talking, but he was scripted. Right. The great scripted president. And I knew right away what the game was. And I predicted what. And the guy that edited my book, Sabotaging America, said for years, John, you've always said the same thing. I said, well, look, it was plain to me what was going to happen. You're sabotaging your country. And all the politicians and all the top corporations went along with it. They thought it was wonderful. Now, you know, I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. You'd be that dumb. But these people have no moral values, and their greed is so stupendous. You know, the innovations, you know, do not come from, you know, from these people at the top of corporations. I mean, look, I worked at Xerox. That was wonderfully innovative when I joined. And then we had top people from IBM and other such people that, you know, didn't understand technology, gave away the Windows and the mouse and all that technology. And I took that technology across to Microsoft and handed it over. Could you believe that? Because they saw no use in it. No matter what we said from below, you know. Because these people at the top are not trained properly in this country, do not have technical degrees, don't have a clue about finance and economics. I happen to have that. Okay? So I can speak to that, and I've talked to Jim about that a lot in our travels up and down in the car. So, you know, look, in life there's balance, okay? And that's what you lose. I agree, you have to have moral values, but the feeling that you're giving money to the rich, to the supply side, and they're going to invest, they've not done so yet. And the banks haven't done so yet. And when they, you know, yes, you know. So, now, I mean, you can appeal to their patriotism, but you've got this multinational cartels, the heads of which don't even live in America, don't even worry about what country. They regard the whole world as their playpen. They borrow money from this country and that country. I can move, you know, as Walsh said, who was head of GE, I want my economy on my factory on a barge. I can just sail it around to the cheapest labor force in the world. So you know, that's their view. They don't really care about. They don't. You know what? As I said, this is why I talked about the state and the persona of the state. There is no will of the people. There's no. So basically, I think people are realizing their vote doesn't count. It really doesn't. And because there's no proper, what I call democratic discourse, okay, where you sit down and have meetings and you talk about these things, whatever social problem it is, economic or otherwise, you know, you must start. Firstly, you must say, look, you're in a hole. We can't go on shoveling out what 500-600 billion trade deficit every year. There's an end point to that. There must be. We must go to some form of balance at some point. So you must start talking about that. Now, Trump has mentioned it. He was the only one who did, which is why I believe he got elected. But he doesn't have any proper solutions. Giving more money to the wealthy won't do it. They'll just put more money in the gambling machine or put it offshore. I mean, if you're wealthy, you go to London and you say, give me a lawyer. I want to start a company in the Cayman Islands. I want it to be completely anonymous, which my name's not on it at all, but we'll have nominees that will head it up, and I'll just put my money over there and disappear from the tax man. And so there's like 30 trillion in such. So you've got parts of the British Empire, the tiny remnants of the British Empire, which is what, 1/5 to a quarter of the whole world at once. When I was born, it was, funny enough. Now there's little pinpricks left, are probably richer than any country in the whole world, almost. Because that's where all the money's gone. Now, so, you know, you've got massive corruption, okay, in the politics. You've got massive ignorance and so on around. And as I say, the real thing is proper democratic discourse, where the people understand that, you know. Anyway, next question. Because I'll talk on first.
Yes. Now, I think right now the party officials are engaged in mutual revenge taking instead of doing something productive. Now, you alluded to the Glass-Steagall Act. I think it should be reenacted.
Right.
The Democrats could do something, try the process again. They failed under Frank and Dodds. Okay, start it again to prevent the banks from taking overly risky adventures. Then the next thing, derivatives. Okay. Now I remember in 2008 when this group in Connecticut, the Harvard people that run this hedge fund and capital management,
Long-term capital management.
the money market fund fell below par. That should never happen again because lots of people have their money in money market funds and they're kind of bank on it that it's a dollar is a dollar, it's never going to fall below it. Number three, you didn't allude to that, but talking about money, Special Prosecutor Mueller is now attacking, among other things, to see whether the Trump administration, before he became the head of the administration, did some money laundering, okay, from Russia. Now, it seems to me that the process of selecting a special prosecutor is all wrong. I mean, he was elected by the Republicans. Sessions recused himself, so he had Rosenstein elect Mueller, but Mueller can be fired by Trump, which is ridiculous. I think that's totally ridiculous. He should be totally independent, and not and pursue his things without running the risk of being fired by Trump because Trump doesn't want him to get into the details of things.
Yes, you're quite right in your summary, which means that if you reform Glass-Steagall, I would go much further than Glass-Steagall actually. But you have to look at almost every institution that exists actually and evaluate, because this country is I mean back
coming back to the special prosecutor, we already had that under Nixon. Okay, the Republicans at the time selected Archibald Cox to become the special prosecutor.
right.
Now, he got into the cover-up situation and made Nixon very uncomfortable. So he asked his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire Cox. He himself didn't have the guts to do it, okay? So he asked Richardson. Now Richardson was too much of a gentleman. He decided to resign. He couldn't do Nixon's dirty work, right? He resigned. So hopefully Mueller is not going to get crushed by the enormous pressure that I am, from the gangsters in the surrounding Trump, and will step away because it's just getting too dirty. I mean, this is a dirty fight they're conducting, and there aren't any gentlemen left. And last of all, I have a question that has nothing to do with any of this.
Yes.
Could you explain to me what the difference is between the Tories and the Whigs?
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually the politics in the 18th century. The Tories were more gentlemen of the landed classes, and the Whigs were more of the progressive liberal liberal classes, but they were both well-to-do because in those days the franchise was limited to people of wealth. And so in those days, only possibly less than 50% of the population had the right to vote in England. Because that was the setup. As I have explained, I think the U.S. is somewhat, buried in aspic with its constitution. It really does need to move on. But corruption is always there. If you're going to have a constitution, the first law, the first article should be the crime against democracy, actually. When you do things that actually benefit a small section and disbenefit the whole nation, that's a crime. That's a crime. That's the first law I would pass. And also, the second pass is, I would always say that just because you've got a badge on your shoulder, remember, you're a public servant. You work for us. You're not our master. And when you go spying on us, okay, for no good reason other than the fact you're pretending to, that should be a crime as well. It's called unusual, searches and seizures, right back from the Magna Carta almost. But the warning I give you is that if you dispossess people and demoralize them so much, you're headed towards a revolution. And when you have a population that's armed to the teeth, as this country is, I would suggest you have a powder keg ready to blow up. Because I don't think these people that have lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their marriages, can't send their kids to college all across these states, are going to put up with this. And by the way, talking about healthcare, which I didn't, it turns out that the public really quite liked Obamacare. In fact, actually, we've got this chinless wonder who couldn't corral his troops in the Senate. Do you realize in his state, the margin of the vote, okay, would have been such if these people had lost their health care, there was enough people who have lost their health care because of things he wanted, this chinless wonder wanted to pass, then the Republicans would have lost the state. And that's true in many states, Kansas and so on and so forth. So, even finally the proletariat will wake up one day. It takes a long time because of this embedded culture, okay, that exists and the prejudice that exists. Well, one day they will wake up, and I would have term limits into Congress. I have term limits anywhere, because the corruption that goes on is. I don't know how long ago. 50 years ago, there was a book called The Case Against Congress about corruption and gerrymandering and all the other things that go on, which denies democracy. Because in the end, you either believe in democracy, and as I said, I believe in economic democracy. People should have a say in their economic lives, because I think it works. I think when people don't, and you say, well, I'm the boss and I tell you what to do because I know more, you don't. You most often don't. In fact, top at Xerox, most people didn't know what was going on. So, because they read the progress reports that go up through the chain, and guess what? As it goes up, it gets more and more sugar-coated. So the guy at the top reads it, everything's great. And down at the bottom, things are disintegrating. And I was in that middle role for a long time, and I made sure we anyway, next question.
Oh, yeah.
Stop saying that.
What's his name again?
Did you get some answers, Frank? Do you believe that we have two left-wing
I
parties?
can do that. I got a question. Actually, I have a question. Briefly, can you, in a very
Succinct way.
succinct, perfect word,
Well,
perfect
I'm not
succinct.
succinct. Ask my wife. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, so we can remember better, because I want you to define some of the terms that we used extensively throughout this talk.
Yes.
I want you to define left, right, liberal, conservative.
All right. Okay. Okay. Left, right. Well, generally speaking, as I said in England, the right are basically, you know, in England, they would be the aristocrats, the lauded gentry who have the wealth. And the left really are the people, the working people who work for the wealthy and don't have the wealth. That really describes the left and the right picture. That's what I grew up to see. Now, in terms of liberal has been, the word has been besmirched over here. Liberal means laissez-faire, means you know, no controls. In fact, Ayn Rand, you could say she was a liberal. No control, you see. You know, let the market, see the belief in the market, that the market will solve all problems. I mean, that was Alan Greenspan's, this is what he said to Paul Beasley. That fraud, you didn't need to control it because the market would solve it, okay? Well, as well, like the market would solve the Depression. You know, and it went on for 10 years until the war. And of course, people were saying, well, you know, the market will come back. And Maynard Keynes famously said, well, yes, of course it will, but in the long run, but we will all be dead in the long run. You know, so that was, now what was the other, that was the left, right, and liberalism.
So you think that left is the working people and right is the aristocracy. I got that.
Well, that's the way it's viewed from what I call, you know, old school politics. Now, what's happened is that what was the aristocracy has really become the wealthy classes. Okay, you see, back Middle Ages, land was the you know, the generator of wealth, and so of course William the Conqueror handed the land over to his barons, and so they became wealthy. So they were the aristocrats who owned land. And
but in this talk, that's
in my talk, I would regard the right as people that generally believe in supply side economics. They generally have the wealth. They like lower taxes. They like more control, if you want. They actually want, they actually like sort of autocratic control, because what they're really frightened of is losing their position and losing their wealth. Now, oftentimes, what I see is, paradoxically, if they have children who generally are gifted wealth, these kids don't amount to much, because why would you beat your brains out learning about Lagrangian you know, calculations if you don't have to, for example, as I did. I mean, you know, it's tough, difficult stuff. So, you know, so you have, for example, family firms, and you know, the father starts it, he's an entrepreneur, hands it to the kid, who decides to spend all the money and wreck the whole deal. So, you know, you have this cycle. So basically, the way I view it is what I'd say the right wing are the people with wealth who want to retain it, who have, I mean, apart from cultural things, okay, because you have this, another whole raft of cultural reasons why you're on the right, but I won't go into those because, you know, they're cultural. But in terms of economics, it's people that have wealth can manipulate people that are powerful enough to be able to buy the politicians, have laws passed, just as Phil Graham did. I mean, basically, he got that 2000 December law passed that really was a gift to Enron. No regulation of any energy contracts. And yet, despite this, Enron failed anyway. So, you know, these people, I think, don't realize, you know, what they don't realize, and their failure really is, that if you're going to have a successful country and a nation, everyone must succeed. Everybody. It's like when I was a manager. My job was to make everybody succeed. Then I succeeded. And until everybody was succeeding, I'd not done my job. And so I made it clear that, please, don't expect me to know everything, because I can't. But you do. And come to me if there's a problem, and we'll fix it. And that's true of everything. That's true of the country. When you have small individuals in cliques feathering their nest, that destroys stuff. And that's what goes on with this money elite. They actually destroy, and they have destroyed the country, I'd say. And that's the difference. That's what I'd say. Yes, Albert.
You earlier in your talk were referring several times to incompetence amongst these people who pass the laws and run the country and so forth. Don't you think it's quite possible that the people who have gotten into the ultimate positions of power are far beyond politics, and they use politics, left, right, liberal, conservative, whatever, to create us, all of us, as the roosters in the cockfight, thinking that we're fighting about real issues, whereas their intention from the very beginning never did have good intentions for humanity. They want the destruction of this nation. Do you not think that's possible?
Yes, I do. I think there are some people that are like that. But on the other hand, there are people like Alan Greenspan who actually did believe in Ayn Rand and stuff. They really do believe that these policies that von Hayek advocates, you know, are good and the way to go. They have a sort of fundamental belief. They really, they don't believe fundamentally that, they don't really believe in democracy, actually. They believe that there should be an and of course, you know, he was totally wrong. I mean, and he admitted it. But so, I agree, and I would say that there is an international cartel. In fact, there's an international cartel of bankers, I think, as you know. These top banking families that control things around the world. This is why you have all these WTO rules where money flows across borders. See, before about 1980, there were capital controls, okay? And so what happened was money could flood in around the world, could actually destroy economies, like when there was a crash in the how are we doing? I think you're telling me not to sit down. I like to answer questions fully, as you know, probably too fully. So yes, no, I think there are a group. Well, we have the Bilderberg Club. We have the World Economic Forum, for example, meets in Davos every year, that try to coordinate things. And so yes, there are groups like this. But there are, like everything else, there are the true believers in some of these systems, like Alan Greenspan, that believe they're doing the right thing. Happens that they, doesn't work well. And he admitted it. He actually physically humbled himself to the Senate and admitted it, that he made some mistakes. I forget his correct phrase, but I think his lifelong beliefs were incorrect, is basically what he said. But I think, to be candid, I think greed is such a powerful force that it trumps reason. I mean, it trumps everything. It trumps morality, integrity, everything. I mean, actually, it gets to the point where cheating people seems to be the smart, clever thing to do. And
if you knew Ayn Rand, and I met her in New York, you would know she had a protege, Nathaniel Brandon, okay? And he was married to Barbara. Right. And Ayn Rand had the idea that everybody had to cater to her, and and she took a shine to her prodigy, Nathaniel Brandt, and had the audacity to have an affair with him and tell his wife she cannot come by the house because he had become her lover and she was unwelcome. Now, that reminds me a little bit of the character, the indecency of Trump. He demands loyalty from everybody to himself,
Give none
but
back.
he doesn't give any loyalty back to anyone. He damages everyone that comes near him.
Yeah, yes, there are some unsavory people in the world, and Albert, you know, getting back to your question, yes, I think there are people that manipulate.
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Yeah, sorry, yes. There is these Machiavellian people who go around the world and you know, work their will, but in the end, there's the will of the people, and that will express itself. In the long run, I'll sit down.
Now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first?
I'll take
Just-
that talk, otherwise John might steal it.
I tried last time.
Last time you did, yeah.
Just to remind everyone, we do have a format for this, and the speaker speaks, and we go to question and answer. If you have comments, this is the period now where you get to comment. This is called the rebuttal period. Not all of the comments are rebuttals, and that's allowed,
5 minutes.
but this is the proper time. I have counseled with people who are far more economically savvy than myself, and they have explained to me that Bill Clinton's surplus it's kind of like, okay, let's say I owe $10,000, and yet I make up a budget which says, okay, this year I'm going to spend $5,000 and I'm going to pay back X amount. And then when I make my yearly budget, well, gee, I have a surplus because I made my budget and came in under budget. Now, that debt was still hanging out there during Clinton's period. And I mean, I think one of the problems we have whenever we're discussing finances is it's very difficult for the average person to wrap their mind around it, and I certainly have trouble. I'm still wondering about that logical disconnect with Keynes, because in my opinion, how can the government have programs when their only source of revenue really is coming in from the people? So it's like, okay, you take my blood and then you're feeding it back to me. I mean, it's like zero-sum game there. And you know, I hear him when he's talking about a mortgage, but see, the thing about a mortgage is very interesting. Considering how much you pay on a mortgage, how much of your actual labor and time goes into paying on a mortgage versus paying cash outright. And then, you know, that's the key word there in mortgage, I think, mort is the French for death. So there's got to be some key in there. One of the other interesting things in here, I mean, there have been epithets thrown around about our president. I've learned during this whole campaign and the presidency not to defend him, because there's so much being slung his way. It's almost, I mean, you never know. I mean, it's going past you on all sides. But one thing I will point out, the HSBC bank affair, where HSBC was caught laundering billions in drug money. Now I get really confused about this because Wachovia got caught previously with 384, or was it $87 billion of laundered money. Nobody went to jail. They got purchased by Wells Fargo, and now I'm hearing about the HSBC affair, and I don't even know how many billions that was, but the folks who managed the HSBC thing happened to be two prominent names of Lois Lerner and James Comey. And no one went to jail over laundering all these billions of dollars of drug money, which really supports when I did an interview with Michael Rupert, former LAPD narcotics officer, he was saying, and he was basing his words really on conversations he had with Catherine Austin Fitz, who is still alive. Rupert's passed away. But he's saying we are living in a narco-democracy. We are, according to him, in a failed economy right now, that if in fact the drug money stopped, everything else would go down the toilet as well. Now that's a very sad state of affairs, but can anybody explain why we have government officials, trusted government officials, who are letting these financial people off the hook on these huge crimes that are going through? And then we have, I forget the guy's name, he bet several $1 billion of investors' money. I know, I heard some people on the radio complaining they'd lost money. And gosh, what was the guy's name? He didn't go to jail either. And
Madoff did go to jail.
no, Madoff went to jail, but this is another instance where gosh, what was his name? I should. But I do remember Jamie Dimon threatening him and saying, if you don't come up with like $1.7 billion, like, you know, within 48 hours, you're going to be feeding the fishes.
Or the guy from New Jersey?
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, what was his name? Yeah, anyway, see, we have all these, we have a two-tier system where I don't have the full information on it, but I heard two things recently. I heard that the Bundy defendants were not allowed to speak in their own defense, and then the next thing I hear is the first trial has finished and the guy's got 64 years for doing what? Protecting property rights, grazing rights. And yet we have people mismanaging and looting billions of dollars, just immense crimes. They're not going to jail, and they're running our country. And this is, I mean, if I have an objection here, I mean, I'd say the system's broke, folks, and let me tell you who I put the most blame on. That is the mainstream media. They have failed in their job to be the watchdogs for the American people. And we are not awake, many of us are not awake, this is true, but I don't think it's totally our fault when we're hearing from all the different stations the same script. You can just switch the channels and almost the same words are coming through all these different mouthpieces. What happened, folks? What happened? What are we living in?
I think we're living in a world that is nothing like what most of us think it is. Talk about people in top positions getting away with their crimes. When Clinton was president, a converted 747 surveillance aircraft loaded with top secret surveillance, instrumentation, electronics, and so forth was flying in international waters near China. The Chinese Air Force sent up fighters and forced it to fly to China and land. And the standing rule is the last guy off that airplane punches the button that blows it to smithereens, so they don't get all those secrets. And Clinton ordered that crew to stand down from that procedure and gave that airplane with all of its secrets to China. Now that to me is treason in the highest felony degree. Nothing ever happened about that. However, it did a great thing for the United States. It got hundreds of millions of dollars of Chinese money into the United States. Of course, it went into the Clinton Foundation, but whoever says anything about that. And if you will look up Larry Nichols on the internet, He was very, very irritated with Mrs. Clinton because of Benghazi. He was a soldier, and he felt that those guys were betrayed by their own government, by her, and they lost their lives over it, and he was pissed off with that. So he came out, he knew that he had cancer, he didn't have a lot of time to live, and he declared that he, for years, had been a hitman for the Clintons. When they needed somebody silenced, he would go kill them. Or if a woman who was about to talk and reveal things, he'd go beat her up. He said this right out. You can find it on the internet. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people in this world, the upper echelon of which are basically fervent, strong believers and practicers of Satanism. And I found this out through a number of different ways. And according to John, what was the guy's name? Mark Passio. If you will look him up, he was in Satanism as a young man until he realized how horrible it was, violating the very principles of morality of the universe, and he got out of it. And he has been spending his life writing books and giving lectures on Satanism and pointing out how high it goes up. And he says that probably it's estimated that of the people born, maybe 1 or 2 or 3% are born sociopathic in their consciousness. But through Satanism and through the widespread practice of this at the upper echelons, all the leaders of the world basically, he estimates it could be as high as somewhere between 20 and 30% of this world who do not care about your pain and your suffering, because you and me and all of the other people in the world are the walking dead. We have no more value than animated clay. And even those who are aware of this and do nothing about it, they're the walking dead. So they have no conscience over this, because you're nothing but clay. You're not some sentient human being in their eyes. That's what's ruling this world today. I mentioned this before. My nephew went to St. Andrew's College in Fife, Scotland years ago, and learned that a lot of the ruling families around Europe will send their children there to that college. And he learned from them, because he's weird, sort of, and he hobnobbed with a lot of these people, and he found out that they are all fervently Satanists. They'll hold themselves out with their sheep's clothing of being Anglican or Catholic or whatever fits in with where they're living, their society. But they're secretly and fervently Satanists, and they firmly believe that through the death of an individual, they can extract that departing life energy, life force, and absorb it into their own beings and strengthen and lengthen their own lives, and that through the deaths of millions, a few may attain physical immortality. Parker told me that he was convinced that people in Europe today, hundreds of years old. Now, he got very close in with this group for a number of years, and it just scared the life out of him when he finally got out of there. It was such a basket case in London after school that his father had to fly over and pack him up and bring him back. In any event, I had a long conversation with what he'd learned about that. But look up these things. Don't deny them. Don't say, oh, I don't believe that. Or you're a conspiracy theorist. Boy, that is one of those little knee-jerk things we have been brainwashed into believing. All those little knee-jerk things. Oh, who would believe in something like that? That's cover. What's going on in this world is beyond most people's imagination. And I've been looking into this probably now for close to 40 years or so, trying to find out. My brother-in-law had a degree of architecture from MIT, a very intelligent man. He told me one time, very lovingly, Albert, you need to go find a psychiatrist. And some years ago, my sister said, some of those things you were talking about years ago are coming true. These people at the top are not incompetent. They're not stupid. They're not making bad decisions. They are brilliant to make us believe that they are incompetent. I had a CIA agent 27 years in that business, mostly in Saudi Arabia and Iran years ago in the 70s, tell me that all wars, famines, and pestilences are planned events. They're not stupidity of diplomacy, they're brilliance to make it look stupid to us. They're not acts of nature at all. I can, as a matter of fact, in the little notebook I have at home, I can give you the patent number for the cure for AIDS that was taken out by the same people who have the patent number for AIDS. That was a CIA created weapon. And this same CIA agent told me in 1974 that World War III, I've told you this before, will be in the 80s. It will not be nuclear. It will appear to be the natural outbreak of a disease, and the purpose is to wipe out Africa and the subcontinent, black Africa and the subcontinent of India. That was his statement. That was AIDS. That was AIDS. AIDS broke out in an area where the World Health Organization was doing extensive inoculation of the population in that area in Africa for all kinds of diseases. So WHO planted AIDS in all of those people by injection. And a group of homosexuals on the East Coast and the West Coast, and some in Haiti. That's where it all started. Had nothing to do with some monkey biting somebody. It's ridiculous. The Asian bird flu was genetically programmed to kill Asians. And in Canada, almost all of the 100 or so people who died from it were Asian. And I think they realized this in China, and it caused a kind of a getting together of top government people with their top mafia people in a common interest here to try to fight against that. So I have read in the past. Anyway, we need to stop wasting our time with Democrat, Republican, right, left, and get rid of all of these parties. We need to do like Iceland did. Everybody go get their favorite pan and big spoon and go surround all of the buildings in Washington, D.C. and beat on those pans night and day 24/7 by the thousands until we scare this government out of office, and then we hold new elections, put all new people in it. That's what we need to do. Yes, we need a revolution. And John, I know how you feel about England and no guns in possession. There was a man I read about in England who had a gun and stopped a man who had broken into his house from killing him and his family. He got 40 years for possession of that weapon. The purpose of weapons owned by the population in this country, as our founding fathers made very clear, is to protect ourselves from government that runs rogue. And that's the biggest danger we have. The federal government has been militarizing police forces all over the country. It is a scary thing. FEMA camps all over the country can hold millions of people today. Why do they have those? Why do they have those? Did FEMA help in the hurricane that hit Louisiana? No. They hindered. Anyhow.
Welcome, comrades. I want to greet you all and congratulate you for hanging in there so long. Some of the irrepressible leftists have already left. They couldn't take it. But you guys are still here. I wanted to address them because I don't want to speak to the choir. I'm going to fill you in on something. And correct me if I'm wrong, John. What triggered this speech was an idea that I put forth. John made the statement that our current government is left and right, Republican and Democrat are right wing, both right wing. I said that's not very accurate. And he said, well, let's talk about that. Is that correct? You remember that?
That's true.
Okay, so my thoughts are still kind of gravitating on that aspect, which was not a big deal in this particular presentation. I thought it was be more of a focus, but I'm going to focus on a little bit. But first, let's pay homage to the Toilette Glorieuse. Everybody's saying bad things about our government. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. And we know more of it than ever with the internet. And we have to keep things in balance now. Yes, we need a revolution. Albert, when you get your pot and pans, I'll be right behind you. But we have to also decide. It's not so hard for us because we're over 50, 60 years old, a lot of us here. Whether we want to destroy everything willy-nilly, or do we want to just fix things better? This has something to do with left and right. I'm going to tell what I've heard on the internet about prominent people self-identifying on the left and right. And it was a different definition than you gave. You said the poor are the left and the rich are the right. Now, back in Marx's day, Karl Marx, that was very correct. Right? It's kind of transformed a little bit. So a more working definition for today, a self-definition of a right-wing person. Ben Shapiro, who talked in Congress this week, I don't know if you saw that, about freedom of speech, but he was called in because he's such an eloquent person. He says the right-wing person in today's context is somebody who believes in equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And he thinks that's the best way forward. Another thing that goes with that is, oh God, I forgot. well, the left wing is obviously the opposite, the Identitarian Politics, where you're not individual, which was kind of like the big deal about it, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. You're Chinese or Japanese, I don't know what you are, Korean, you're black, you're Jewish, you're rich, you're poor, you're a woman, you're gay, you're whatever, you know? That's not who you are. Why divide people that way? So what's happening now, the LGB is now no longer LGB. It's LGBTQ, X, Y, Z, M, M, blah, blah, blah. There's 73 genders. It's going to keep going until it's back to the individual. That's the ultimate identity. So, the left has been taken over by Marxists. It's called neo-Marxism, and it's no longer the working class against the rich. They tried that. You're still a little bit behind times. You're still going with that. Now they got new identities. It's victimhood, and you're born with a victimhood. So, like, if you're black and you're a woman and you're gay, then nobody's allowed to talk to you. If you speak on politics, there's no argument. You don't know what you're saying. You don't even, Well, I can't say nothing because I'm not a woman. Let's an analogy. Is it important that if you get a heart problem, is it important that your doctor has heart disease? That's an analogy. So you can weigh in on issues just by being more knowledgeable and being more intelligent. Oh, that's another thing. We're not allowed to be intelligent anymore. So this neo-Marxism thing is a left thing, and it's been the media's been pushing it. Modern government's been pushing it. This has to do with the demographic end of modern civilization. So I'm not too crazy about the left wing, but the right left. The other thing I did agree with was the government's is very right wing, left and right when it comes to war. When it comes to foreign policy, it's very much old fashioned right wing, neocon. Let's have another war. I think it's a mistake to concentrate on Trump too much. That is a joke. You think Trump's a joke? You're a joke when you take him seriously. But not even that. When you take what the media is feeding you seriously, that is a joke. I forgot my main point about the left and the right. But anyway, so I kind of agree with everybody that we're in a situation. I don't think it's a good idea to, I've said this a million times, to get too caught up in the Democrat-Republican thing. I think that's a real trap. I also have to agree with the idea that the media is very influential in its repetition of things that could be lies that get us brainwashed. People here, like the lady couldn't stop screaming. She left. Every time somebody would say something you like, oh yeah, she's hypnotized. I mean, it's hysterical. It's nothing to do with reality. She has been fed something that's bigger than reality. It's bigger than this table. It's bigger than my flesh and blood. It's a narrative. So the narrative is king. It's lies. And good luck, America.
I guess I'm the only one left standing. I want to thank our speaker. I think he did a terrific job here tonight. He got us all thinking, which is very important. And where we're going, how we're going to get there, and what to do about it. There's a purpose of regulation was never to put the government on the backs of people, but to harness the forces of profit and greed and make it work for society instead of against it. That's the purpose of regulation. People seem to forget that. But I'm reminded of, there was a fellow ran for president. He used to run Pat Paulson was his name. He used to run for president all the time. And he said that he wasn't left wing or right wing. He said if you're left wing or right wing, you have a tendency to fly around in circles. He preferred the center of the bird, you know. So anyway, I remember that. And Martin Keynes he's an economist I believed in when I grew up with him. That was we were taught a lot of that Keynesian economics, and that was that if the economy was bad, the government would spend more money to spur the economy and make it go. That's what was used during World War II to keep this economy going at the time, and to build it up before World War II, and under Roosevelt. But then we came along with, I'm trying to think of the guy's name, it was from University of Chicago.
Milton Keynes.
Milton Friedman, yeah. His idea was that he was more like a free market system. He was more like Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, you know, let the free market system solve all our problems. It doesn't work because you end up with the free enterprise of burglars. That's what you have. So we have 25 million people out of work in this country, either unemployed or underemployed. That's our problem. And it's in Europe the same thing. We have automation replaces people with machines. Machines don't pay taxes. People do. That's what we seem to forget. If you go back in history, 1938, we went through a depression. Then we tried to get out of the depression by WPA projects, different programs to get the economy going. Eventually, that didn't work either. Finally, they shortened the workday in this country. They went from 10 hours to 8 hours, from 60-hour week to a 40-hour week. It was the Fair Labor Standards Act. And when they passed it, it only affected interstate commerce, did not affect small business. So big business, they didn't go along with it too well, but they had an option. They could break up, demerge, form smaller companies, get around the restrictive labor law, or spend money, become more productive, and produce more in less time than competition small business did in more time. Within 5 years, big business and labor went hand to hand each state legislature to put the small business on its shorter workday because miserable company wanted to limit their competition. That's how we got the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week in this country. That's how I think we could get a 30-hour work week and maybe a 6-hour day in this country. And we wouldn't gain 2 hours leisure time because we already lost it in traffic. We get it back. And you don't need a lunch break. You only work 6 hours. And the price of overtime has to be raised maybe to double time because the purpose of overtime was never to put the government on the back. The purpose of overtime was to outweigh the cost of fringe benefits. I'm from the railroad industry. I grew up in that 47 years, and I can tell you that it was cheaper to work 2 people 12 hours a day and pay time and a half after 8 than it was to work 3 people 8 hours a day because of the high cost of fringe benefits. So the net result was you had 2 people overworked, overtaxed, paying for a third person to sit on with their feet up, and nobody's happy. Today in that same industry, they got rid of the caboose, but never ran the engine, so we had too many people. They got rid of the people. Now there's only 2 people on a train. It used to be 5. And so what's happened? We've lost over half the workforce. And so the Railroad Retirement Board was going up in smoke because the retirement system, they went to the corporation and you got to do something. So you're making, so anyway, the corporation now agreed to pay 2.5 times what the employee pays for pension costs. And they don't mind doing it, they're making a fortune, they get rid of everybody. My point is, machines do replace people. Machines don't pay taxes, people do. That's why we have 25 million people out of work in this country. That's part of it. The other part of it is we have corporations leaving town, going overseas where labor costs are cheaper. We got corporations that are bigger than countries. That's what's happened in this country. Additionally, we've got corporate rules we had set up originally. When the first corporations started in this country, they were to be for 5 years to build a bridge, that was the purpose of it. And when the project was done, the corporation was finished. That's how corporations started. Eventually, they had to be there for the government purpose, for the people's purpose, and for profit. But all these other sections have gone out. The only thing the corporation exists for today is profit. And that's why stockholders demand maximum rate of return, and that's why corporations will go around this world and do what they want. And that's why we let them do it. And that's the big trouble we have. I'm reminded of Weimar Germany. You know, they ended up they ended with paper. They didn't buy anything. We got off the gold standard. We're on the standard now where the government is what backs up the money, or what the country ostensibly is worth is what backs up the money. And we may end up like Weimar Germany if we keep going the way we are. We're $19 trillion in debt. Anything we do in Washington, Bernie Sanders ran for president. He had a whole bunch of programs he wanted to do, but every one of them costs money, and we don't have the money to pay for them. That's the problem. So what we have to do is we got to generate money. We got to generate jobs. And in my view, shorten the workday is one way to do it. But then we have another problem. We have corporations leaving town. They'll leave even faster to go where labor costs are yet cheaper. So we need to put tariffs on corporations, but we can't do that because we got a Congress that won't act to do that. We got the best Congress money can buy. That's our problem. And the way to change that, I think that what will Congress vote for? In my view, they'll vote for free airtime the last 90 days of a general election. That would change. Our speaker here talked about the amount of money spent on elections today in this country is astronomical. But if you can find the last 90 days of a general election, then the incumbent would not spend money before the 90 days because it'd be a waste of time, because his challenger would wait till he did everything and then get free airtime the last 90 days and beat him. So my point is that, well, why would Congress vote for this? There's no history of a challenger beating an incumbent since before the year 2000. They won't see that. They're blinded by greed. They'll vote for it. And what will happen is Congress will change it because some challenger will beat some incumbents. And then the society will the Congress will represent the people who do the electing instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you put tariffs on corporations overseas and get the jobs back here. What are the tariff going to be? The tariff will be the difference in labor costs, the difference in environmental protections, the difference in transportation costs, the difference in taxes. That's what you pay. Unless you don't want to pay it, produce it here. It will have jobs here. Every country should have, to its maximum, be able to develop its own country, have its own jobs within its own country, not be dependent on going to cheap labor somewhere else. This is why we're in the problem. This is the problem we have. This is why we have these wars we have. We have. I'm reminded of what was it, Libya? We had a speaker here who talked about that. He said that the paper bankers went after Libya. The Gaddafi of Libya wanted to go on the African dinar, which is a gold-backed currency, and the paper bankers went after him. They didn't want to see that happen, and that's why we had the war. And I'm reminded that Saddam Hussein wanted to go on the euro, if you remember, and put the oil on euro, and we got all upset over that. I think that is part of why the war. And so our paper bankers, this thing cannot go on. It's going to blow up in its face unless we balance the budget, unless we get our debts down. And the one way to do that, I try to mention that. Anyway, I better shut up while I'm ahead and give this back to our speaker. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad I saw peace and harmony break out in the room tonight. And because that was my intention all along. And so, just to say a couple of words at the end. Yes, I'm very grateful for you all showing up, and my wife is also grateful. I hope I haven't bored you too much, but hopefully you've listened to a few words I've said. I do think that some of the things I've said make sense. I do think all of you should investigate some of the things I've said more thoroughly. I mean, in an hour I can't possibly go over everything and all my thoughts, but I only hit a few points here and there, and sometimes they're coherent and sometimes they're not so coherent. But generally speaking, I think the world gets along better when the poorest in society gets along, okay? And so I am a general principle. I'm always for the underdog. I mean, I was, right after the war, those years of deprivation and austerity were bad. I was in the underdog class, and so I felt it and experienced it. And when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, it tells. And so I would never ever class myself in the overclass, and I think those in the overclass really have a duty to help the underclass. And I see basically people who are privileged remembering they believe they're not part of a nation, not part of a society, owe nothing to anybody. Whereas in fact, to be a civilization, and I always joke about going back to civilization, which I'll do next week. A true civilization really worries about everybody and makes sure everyone does well and gets along. And when you have this huge disparity in wealth that we see, which is so blatant and open, where you want to deny people health benefits because of some philosophical problem, really. I think everyone turned out that this marvelous plan of 7 years fell apart because it was so blatantly unfair and so on. I think there was a general realization about that. It was amazing to see. And poor John McCain came off his deathbed to a hostile world. It was amazing. But generally speaking, I think we should all think about some Christian principles, that we're here a short time, life goes by fast, and we should think about integrity, honesty, and helping each other. And I think if you can do that, if you stick out your hand of friendship, especially to people in need, especially to people that need a bit of encouragement, try and give them a bit of help. It might only be a few kind words, but I think if we thought about that more often and forgot that this pursuit of greed that we seem to be wrapped up in, I think we'd be a whole lot better country and a whole lot better world.
Well, that's it for our formal meeting, but see you all next week, and they kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know, and you talk to our speaker if he's still here, and I think he'll be talking to you, so whatever you like, it's up to you. Thanks for coming. See you next week.
Good job.